November 1983. The Arkansas Delta was the color of wet iron that morning. Low clouds, cold drizzle, bare fields lying flat beyond the highway like somebody had scraped all the color off the earth and left only stubble, mud, and wind. By 8 o'clock, pickups were already lined up outside the Prairie County Farm Machinery Barn just south of Hazen. Diesel smoke hanging under the awning, men stomping water off their boots, auction hands dragging chains through puddles. A used grain drill sat out near the fence line with faded red paint, one bent marker arm, and a price in Jonah Mercer's mind that could not go $1 too high. That was why he came, not to look around, not to dream, not to linger. He had come for that drill, and only that drill. Jonah Mercer was 34 years old. He farmed 88 acres of rented and inherited ground on the ragged edge between rice country and soybean land, and he had spent 13 months stacking stray dollars into a single paper envelope for this one chance. He had sold eggs. He had trapped beaver out of drainage ditches for neighbors. He had welded gates at night. He had skipped replacing a roof patch that should have been replaced. He had put off buying seed a week longer than comfort allowed. By that morning he had $462. That was all. And because every honest dollar he had was folded inside that envelope in his inside pocket, he had nothing left for the thing people would notice first: his coat. It had once been brown duck canvas. Years of weather had worn it into 3 different colors. The elbows were patched with faded feed sack cloth. The left cuff had been restitched in thick white thread that looked almost blue in the cold light. One pocket had ripped clean through, so Jonah had pinned it shut with a silver safety pin the size of a finger joint. When he walked in, the room did not notice him all at once. It noticed him in pieces: the wet shoulders, the patched elbows, that bright little safety pin catching light every time he moved, and then it noticed who was sitting in the front row: Lowell Vance. Lowell owned more ground than any man in 3 counties: rice, soybeans, storage, custom harvesting, 2 combines newer than some marriages, and a line of credit big enough to make smaller men quiet when he walked into a room. He wore a pressed field jacket, alligator boots, and the easy expression of a man who had spent 15 years confusing borrowed scale for invincibility. He looked up. He saw Jonah. He saw the coat. And then he stood. You know the kind of silence that moves through a room before laughter starts? Not silence exactly, more like people making space for whatever ugly thing is about to happen. That silence moved through the barn. Put one boot on the bench rail in front of him, leaned out, and said, loud enough to hit the cinder block walls and come back again, "Mercer, did the crows peck your jacket to pieces, or did you lose a fight with a feed sack?" A few men laughed because Lowell Vance had spoken, and that's what rooms like that do. Jonah stopped walking. Lowell smiled wider. "I'll save you some trouble, son. Any man trying to buy iron in a coat like that ought to start with a needle, not a bid card." More laughter now, sharper, easier, the kind people give when they are relieved the knife is not in them. Lowell tipped his chin toward Jonah's chest. "Careful with that safety pin. Might be the strongest piece of metal you came here with." The room broke. Not everybody, but enough. Enough for Jonah to hear it from all sides. He stood there in that wet coat, with the paper envelope against his ribs, and for 1 second the whole barn belonged to Lowell Vance. Then Jonah did something the room did not expect. He nodded once, just once, and in a voice so level it made Lowell lean forward to catch it, Jonah said, You're right. Coat's about done. Then he turned around and walked back out into the rain. No speech, no threat, no stumble. Just the door opening, the wet wind pushing in, and Jonah Mercer leaving with every eye in the room on his back. That drive home took 41 minutes. He crossed the flat blacktop through Carlisle, then south again past empty ditches, skeletal pump rigs, and a little white church with a fellowship hall his grandfather had helped roof 30 years earlier. He did not turn on the radio. He did not stop for coffee. He did not rehearse what he wished he had said. He drove. When he got home, he hung the coat on the porch nail, sat down on the top step of the clapboard house his grandfather built after Korea, and watched water drip from the eaves into the yard. Beside the door stood a pair of cracked rubber boots. Near the steps, a broken planter chain he had been meaning to fix. Beyond the ditch, his fields lay cold and waiting. And somewhere between one drip and the next, Jonah Mercer made himself a promise in 3 parts. First, he would never put a bank between himself and next season. Second, he would farm smaller than pride liked, but surer than debt allowed. Third, someday, when the weather changed for everybody, he would still be standing on his ground after Lowell Vance's borrowed empire had begun to sink. That promise did not make him dramatic. It made him exact. Now you need to understand where that exactness came from. Jonah was born in 1949. His mother cleaned rooms at the old motel off Highway 70 until her lungs gave out when he was 10. His father drifted west with a road crew the next spring and never drifted back. So Jonah was raised by his grandfather, Silas Mercer, on 88 mean acres that flooded too easily in spring and cracked too hard in August. Silas had one sentence for everything. He would say it over breakfast, he would say it under a tractor, he would say it while sharpening a shovel. Never sign away a harvest you haven't grown yet. He said it slow, like he wanted each word to take root. And Jonah heard it enough times that by the time Silas died in 1978, the sentence had become less like advice and more like bone. While other men expanded on notepaper and optimism, Jonah stayed mixed and narrow. Soybeans where the ground would take them, a few acres of rice when water lined up, a truck patch, some hens, a handful of beef cattle, whatever kept cash moving without requiring him to kneel in a bank office. That was why the grain drill mattered so much in 1983. His old one was failing. Seed depth was inconsistent. Half the opener discs were worn thin as spoons. He needed a replacement before spring, or his margins would go from slim to imaginary. But after the sale barn humiliation, he did not buy Lowell's laughter back with anger. He solved the problem another way. 2 Saturdays later, Jonah drove to a salvage yard outside Pine Bluff and spent 6 hours walking rows of broken equipment sunk axle deep in winter mud. He came home with mismatched disc assemblies, one usable wheel hub, a rusted seed box lid, and a drive chain that looked hopeless until you held it in the right light. $78 total. That winter, under a hanging shop bulb and a space heater that worked only when kicked, Jonah tore his old grain drill down to the frame. He straightened bent arms with heat and a cheater bar. He cut new bushings from scrap. He filed teeth by hand. He rebuilt the meter assembly using a parts diagram so old the corners had turned soft. By February, his fingers were split at the knuckles, and the barn floor looked like a machine had exploded across it. By March, the drill ran straight. It did not look new. It looked better than new things look after a year of debt, and Jonah wore that same patched coat through all of it. In March of 1984, after one good soybean sale and 3 months of saying no to every unnecessary expense, he walked into a workwear store in Stuttgart and bought a used-looking, plain green field jacket off the clearance rack for $31. He kept the old coat, folded it once, set it on the top shelf of the hall closet, left the safety pin in the pocket. That coat would stay there a long time. The next 5 years did not look dramatic from the road. That matters because people misunderstand survival stories. They think the middle is made of bold moves. Most of the time, the middle is repetition so steady it becomes invisible. Jonah leased a few extra acres one season, gave them back the next when the numbers got stupid. He sold eggs to a diner in Duval's Bluff. He butchered 2 beeves a year for families who paid in cash. He grew enough variety that one bad price did not kill the whole year. He patched instead of replaced. He bought from estate sales. He bartered labor for parts. And every time a season ended with anything left, even $20, even $12, even $7 in crumpled bills after fuel and feed and taxes, Jonah put it into a square Prince Albert tobacco tin and slid that tin beneath the false bottom of a flour bin in the pantry. Quiet money. Slow money. Money that never got admired because nobody ever saw it. Meanwhile, Lowell Vance kept rising in public and unraveling in private. He bought another block of irrigated ground in 1984, added leased acreage in 1985, rolled short notes into bigger notes, bought steel bins when steel was dear, signed papers in offices with fluorescent lights and men who told him scale was safety. And in those same years, Lowell kept performing himself. He drove a new truck every fall, hosted catfish boils after harvest, talked in the language of volume, equipment, and timing windows. If he passed Jonah on a county road, he would lift 2 fingers from the wheel as if blessing some antique method that happened to still be moving. The county made its choice about which man represented the future. Jonah was what people called careful when they meant small. Lowell was what they called impressive when they meant leveraged. Then the larger math turned. This part is not opinion. It is arithmetic wearing work boots. Through the 1970s and into the early 1980s, farmers across the Mid-South had been told the same thing farmers everywhere were told: expand or disappear, borrow against rising land, buy efficiency, catch the export wave, let tomorrow's prices justify today's paper. For a while, that lie looked like strategy. Then inflation got treated like an emergency. Interest rates climbed into places old assumptions could not breathe. Operating notes that had once felt manageable began coming back sharper, heavier, hungrier. Land values stalled, then slid. Crop prices did not rescue the men who needed rescuing. The margin between tight and finished narrowed to almost nothing. A man leveraged at 8% could sometimes posture as a genius. The same man staring at refinance numbers near 20 was just a man standing on rotten boards above deep water. By 1987, forced sales were no longer rumors. They were dates on calendars. By 1988, auctioneers were running county to county, reading serial numbers into microphones while families stood near fence lines trying not to look at each other. And Lowell Vance was in that current up to his throat. He sold one combine, then a truck, then grain in a market he would have mocked 2 years earlier. He restructured once, then again, then mortgaged equipment to protect land and land to protect equipment until the paperwork itself began to look like a trap closing. Jonah watched all this the way a man watches a storm line moving across flat country, not with joy, with recognition. Because there is a terrible kind of clarity in finally seeing that the man who embarrassed you in public had been borrowing against fear the entire time. The call came in January of 1989. Federal lenders were forcing liquidation. Everything. The Vance home tract, storage, bins, machine sheds, rice ground, soybean ground, tenant houses, the white column farmhouse Lowell liked to describe as legacy whenever bankers visited. Jonah heard it at the co-op while paying cash for mineral blocks. Two men behind him lowered their voices the way men do around news that feels halfway between scandal and obituary. Jonah did not turn around. He paid, loaded the blocks, drove home. Then he went into the pantry, lifted the flour bin insert, and pulled out the Prince Albert tin. $14,830. Not enough to outmuscle corporations, enough to begin. That afternoon he opened the county plat book. By evening he had names written in pencil. By the end of the week he had started making calls. Not to rich men, not to spectators, to people who remembered. A widow whose sons had lost leased ground to Lowell in '82. A church deacon with cash set aside from selling timber. A catfish farmer who hated banks more than he loved comfort. Two brothers farming rented dirt after their father got foreclosed out. A retired welder, a feed store owner. Three small growers from Monroe County. One rice mill mechanic with savings and patience. Jonah called 19 people. 14 said yes. 3 said maybe, then yes. 2 apologized and said they could not. That was enough. By sale day, Jonah had letters of commitment, church-backed private notes, one small land contract drafted by a lawyer in Lone Oak, and a plan no corporate bidder in polished boots would have guessed from the outside. The plan was not to become Lowell Vance. The plan was to make sure Lowell Vance's acreage did not become anonymous. March 3rd, 1989. Same barn, same cinder block walls, same sour coffee smell, same damp concrete. Only now the room had a different species in it. Liquidation buyers. Men from Memphis, men from Little Rock, men who wore khaki field coats that had never seen a fence staple. Broker types with legal pads. 2 investors who kept whispering per acre numbers to each other like they were choosing tile. And there, 3 rows up on the left side, sat Jonah Mercer in a clean denim shirt and that plain green jacket he had bought 5 years earlier. On his lap was a gray file folder. No one paid him much attention at first. Why would they? Rooms like that are trained to notice the wrong men. Then look who was sitting in front. Lowell Vance. He was 61, but death had a way of adding years all at once. His face looked hollowed. The swagger was gone. The pressed jackets were gone. He wore a faded cap, cheap work gloves tucked into one pocket, and boots so ordinary they seemed almost anonymous. He sat with his hands clasped between his knees and stared at the floor, as if maybe, if he studied it hard enough, the concrete might open and let him out. Jonah looked at him and felt none of the sweetness he used to imagine a hurt man ought to feel. No victory song, no private applause. Only the cold realization that Lowell had never truly been larger than life. He had just been louder than fear. The equipment went first. A rice combine that cost a fortune new went for a fraction of what Lowell still owed on it. Pickup trucks, discs, pumps, trailers, bins. One by one, the years of looking powerful turned back into inventory. Every sale had the same sound after the hammer fell. Not noise, absence. Then, just before noon, the auctioneer lifted the sheet on the home tract. 640 acres, prime irrigated ground, the Vance farmhouse, machine sheds, the pecan lane, 2 wells, 3 tenant houses, and the family cemetery beyond the north tree line. Opening number, silence. Corporate buyers love silence because silence lowers price. They waited for it to stretch, waited for no local hand to move, waited for the land to start falling toward bargain territory. Jonah raised his card. The sound in the room changed. One bidder answered. Jonah lifted again. Another answered. Jonah lifted again. 550, 6, 640, 680. Now the men from out of town were studying him. Not his face first, his math. What they saw was a local farmer with no visible backing pushing land above the easy steal zone. 720, 750, 780. One investor stopped. The other checked with a man near the door, got a tiny shake of the head, and folded. The auctioneer scanned the room. $780 an acre, going once. Lowell looked up. Going twice. He turned in his seat, found Jonah 3 rows behind him, and for the first time in years the whole shape of the story connected in his eyes. Sold. Sold to bidder 114. The room released a breath. Jonah stood, came down the bleacher steps, walked past Lowell, set the gray folder on the clerk's table, opened it. Inside were 17 signed commitments, notarized where they needed to be, each one from a local family or backer willing to anchor the purchase outside a conventional banknote. Jonah's cash, their cash, private paper, church-backed guarantees. A 7-year contract structure negotiated directly around the carcass of institutional lending. Local money for local ground. On the last page was Jonah's handwritten land map. Break the tract. Resell in workable parcels. Keep prices fair. Owner finance to families who could farm but could no longer get clean credit. No absentee strip mining. No speculative flipping. No vanity empire. He had not come to win a trophy. He had come to interrupt a pattern. Lowell stood up slowly. His voice, when it came, sounded sanded down to almost nothing. Mercer. Jonah turned. Lowell swallowed. One in that coat. Not a question. Just a man finally saying out loud the memory he had been carrying too. Jonah looked at him for a second, then said, "Yes." Lowell nodded once, like the answer hurt less than he expected and more than he deserved. His eyes dropped to the folder, then back to Jonah. "The house," he said. "The lane. Just a few acres. Is there any way at all?" He stopped there because shame has a way of editing a man mid-sentence. Jonah let the room stay quiet. This was the moment pain likes to fantasize about, the moment where you humiliate a humiliator and call it justice. But revenge is easy theater. Jonah Mercer had not spent 5 years becoming exact just to perform for strangers. He asked the clerk for a blank receipt slip, took out a pen, wrote for less than a minute. Then he handed the paper to Lowell. 10 acres around the farmhouse. Use of the house for life. No rent, no lien, no ceremonial gratitude. One condition. "You will tell it," Jonah said. Lowell stared at him. Tell what? What debt did to you, Jonah said. Every boy in FFA, every young couple about to sign an operating note because somebody in a tie called it growth. Every church supper where farm talk starts sounding like bragging. Every one of them. You will tell the truth plain, and you will keep telling it till somebody else says it for you. Lowell's mouth trembled before anything else did. Jonah kept going. You laughed at a coat because you thought being bigger made you safer. It didn't. So that's the price. Not money, warning. For a second Lowell did not move. Then his eyes filled. Not loud, not cinematic. Just the exhausted tears of a man whose self-invention had finally run out. He signed. So did Jonah. And the paper that spared Lowell Vance his house was written on the back of a liquidation receipt. Now here is the part that decides whether a story means anything. What happened after the applause nobody gave? Because life after the dramatic scene is where a character stops pretending. Jonah and his partners did what the map said. They split the home tract into 7 workable units and later helped route additional Vance acreage into smaller local ownership packages. Some went to families Lowell had once priced out. Some went to sons of foreclosed farmers. One parcel went to a widow's boys who had been working day labor for 3 seasons straight. Every deal was built to hold. Not flashy, not charitable theater. Actually hold. By the end of 1990, 22 families in that part of the Delta had land under arrangements designed to get them clear, not trap them again. Jonah kept 120 acres adjoining his own, the first meaningful expansion of his life. He still did not borrow. He still repaired before replacing, still diversified, still bought seed with a pencil and not with adrenaline. And Lowell Vance kept his side of the receipt. From 1989 until 1996, he drove an old cream-colored Ford pickup from county to county, speaking anywhere somebody would let him stand up and tell the truth. FFA chapters, extension meetings, church fellowship halls, farm credit forums where the room got very still once he said his name. He talked about the first easy note, then the second, then the way debt stops feeling like danger and starts feeling like identity. He talked about land values that looked eternal until they didn't, about refinancing like it was rescue when really it was delay, about the humiliation of watching your own equipment sell to men who mispronounce the town names. And every time he told it, somewhere near the end, he would say there was a farmer in a patch coat who taught him what surviving a storm actually meant. Some young men thanked Lowell after those talks. He never let them stop there. Don't thank me, he would say. I'm what happens when appetite puts on a suit. Thank Jonah Mercer. He's proof a man can stay small long enough to stay standing. Lowell died in September of 1996, on his porch, before daylight, from a heart that had been overworked in more ways than one. At the funeral, held under a hard white sky at a brick church outside Hazen, Jonah Mercer carried one corner of the casket. A reporter from Little Rock, young enough to still confuse drama with meaning, asked him afterward why. Why carry a man who humiliated you in public? Why help bury him? Jonah looked across the gravel lot toward fields already turning toward harvest and said, because the laugh wasn't the last thing he did. The reporter waited. Jonah said, a bad morning tells you what a man is at his worst. The years after tell you whether he stayed there. That line ran in a Sunday paper. Some people clipped it. Most forgot. Jonah never cared which. He is 81 now, still on Mercer's ground, still in the same house, though the porch has been rebuilt twice and the pantry floorboards don't creak in the same places. He does not farm full tilt anymore. Two younger families work most of the acreage under leases designed the way he believes leases should be designed, fair enough to let the next man keep breathing. He still keeps that old coat, top shelf, safety pin still in the pocket, and every first Saturday in November, if his knees are cooperating and the weather has any cold in it at all, Jonah drives back to that machinery barn south of Hazen. He doesn't go to bid, doesn't go to sell. He goes to sit. He sits 3 rows up on the left side if the place is empty enough to let memory have its old geometry. He looks down at the concrete. He remembers wet shoulders, cheap laughter, the exact weight of $462 against his ribs, and the strange calm that arrived the moment he decided silence would outlast performance. Then, right before he leaves, Jonah does something no one else in that barn would understand if they walked in at the wrong second. He takes the old patched coat off its hanger. He drapes it over the rail in front of him, and for 1 minute, sometimes less, sometimes more, he stands there in shirt sleeves and lets the November cold come straight through him. No speech, no audience, no ceremony, just an old farmer, a ruined coat, an empty sale barn, and the private knowledge that the day which tried to shrink him became the day that taught him exactly how large patience could be. Then he lifts the coat again, carries it out to the truck, and goes home.